Jackson Pollock was an American abstract expressionist painter in the early to mid-1900s. His most well-known works were created using his famous drip method, resulting in volatile swaths of color and texture. But some of my favorite Pollock paintings are the ones containing bizarre, barely identifiable figures. Today, I'd like to bring our attention to Moby Dick, painted in 1943.
I promise this is going somewhere.
Now you might be saying to yourself, some painting of Moby Dick this is, he's not even in it. But are you sure? Could that be the suggestion of a tale? Is that the wink of an eye? Where in the world is that wicked white whale? The answer is, I don't know. But the part of this work in particular that fascinates me is that for just a second there, the person perceiving this painting became Captain Ahab from Herman Melville's famous novel. Obsessive, paranoid, fanatical, and fervent in his pursuit of Moby Dick. Traits that I'm betting you adopted, even if just for an instant, when you first saw this painting. In that moment, you connected with a character through your shared experience. But why am I talking about this anyway? Because there's one eensy little question that I would love to hear your answer to. What makes a game truly great? There's a ton of different rationales you might use when constructing your answer. Maybe it's the graphics, or the music, or the gameplay mechanics. But seeing as I'm itching to blurt out a buzzword, I'll cut to the chase and say that today I want to talk about Ludonarrative harmony. I've actually kind of introduced this concept to you already, but let's break down the term anyway. Narrative is the game's story, what the characters do in the game's world. Ludo comes from the Latin term ludus, meaning play, sport, or game. In this context, it referred to a game's actual interaction, as in the player's input affecting the game's state in some way. And of course, harmony just means working well together, as in greater than the sum of its parts. So the conjunction of all these terms, ludonarrative harmony, occurs when the player's interaction with a game and the game's narrative work so well together that it elevates the game as a whole. Hopefully, the intro to this video makes a bit more sense now. It's unconventional to think of the experience of looking at a painting as playing, but if you want to connect the painting named Moby Dick with the book Moby Dick, then a form of ludonarrative harmony is achieved with Pollock's painting, as the viewer's experience of trying to discern Moby's appearance in the painting directly parallels Captain Ahab's obsessive search for the white whale. But before talking about some examples of awesome games that pull this off, let's look at some games containing the opposite, ludonarrative dissonance.
Well, I'm beat. Time to head back home. You just got here. Ooh, my guts went up. What the fuck is he talking about?
It's more likely you've heard of this term before, as it's popped up in game journalism a good number of times. Clint Hawking pretty much coined the term in a blog post criticizing BioShock, pointing out that though the gameplay rewards selfish actions, like powering up the player character at the expense of others' well-beings, the player character is forced into a selfless role in the actual narrative. It's a mismatch of touted values. An occurrence that's a lot simpler to understand has been pointed out in the Uncharted series. Nathan Drake is supposed to be a lovable rogue, but he kind of kills a lot of people. Like, a lot. This is even referenced in Uncharted 4, with a trophy that appears when you kill 1,000 people. What does Nathan Drake even do? I don't think he has a job, rather he seems to just live off the sales of artifacts he pilfers from historical sites or straight from museums, presumably to be sold at the black market, i.e. very much illegal.
He's an asshole.
Sometimes, narrative dissonance can work in a game's favor. Doki Doki Literature Club is a psychological horror game wearing the skin of a cute anime dating sim. I won't get into too many spoilers, but no matter what character the player opts to spend time with, no matter what choices they make, something terrible will happen. One of the worst things that could possibly happen, happens. Despite what I just told you, that the player's choices don't affect the event, the player character will break down and wonder what they could have done differently, begging to understand why this happened, what they did wrong. It's a brutal twist of the knife, right? The theme of inconsequential choices continues to develop as the characters in DDLC are continuously tortured by circumstances out of their control. The game highlights the dissonance between a typical dating sim's interactivity and the grim reality the characters within a dating sim would realistically deal with, should they become aware of their situation. Imagine an omniscient being appearing in your world and realizing that the only way your story will be told is if they spend time with you. It'd be enough to drive you crazy, wouldn't it? But we strayed a bit too far from the actual title of the video, so let's finally start highlighting some examples of ludonarrative harmony and how it can really engage a player.
Please don't ruin this for me. Follow her!
The Last of Us is an action-adventure / survival horror game developed by Naughty Dog and directed by Neil Druckmann. It came out in 2013, and then again in 2014, and then again in 2022. The Last of Us is an amazing game. The atmosphere, the acting, and the actual feel of the gameplay are all astoundingly well done. But of course, we're especially interested in the game's narrative today, so let's break it down. Put simply, the world of The Last of Us is in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, though the cause is actually a mutated cordyceps fungus that has evolved to infect humans. If you didn't know, cordyceps is a fungus which infects and controls the brains of small insects, eventually sprouting from their bodies to spread their spores. How ghastly. And in the hypothetical world where cordyceps starts affecting humans, disastrous. Society as we know it collapses, but for dad-turned-smuggler Joel, hope surfaces with Ellie, who's he's tasked with escorting across the country, with the hopes of somehow creating a vaccine from her body. Because in a world where the cordyceps fungus has taken over, Ellie is somehow completely immune to the infection. What follows is a road trip straight from hell, dealing with clickers, bloaters, stalkers, and the worst of the bunch, David. I feel like because of a certain endgame event that I will be spoiling soon, the franchise as a whole has a reputation for containing a ton of moral ambiguity, but most of the first game isn't really about that. There's practically zero instances when a combat encounter Joel and Ellie find themselves in isn't clearly kill or be killed, and the people you're killing are all like almost totally evil.
He ain't even hurt.
Oh man, I wonder if these bandits actively preying on good Samaritans deserve this fate I am bestowing on them. Dang, these raiders are trying to take over this dam and kill the innocent people there, but am I really doing the right thing? Yes. We can simplify most of The Last of Us's narrative into the idea of protecting Ellie, as the main plot is all about escorting her to meet with the Fireflies and hopefully create a cure, or, a vaccine. It's a very altruistic action with a very humanitarian goal. Let's do a little exercise and map the immediate intent of Joel's / the players' actions, as well as the broader goal when it comes to the game's narrative over the length of the game. Like we've said, Joel, and by extension the player, spend most of their time protecting Ellie, and by extension themselves. There's some variance when it comes to particular chapters, but it's Ellie's survival that is paramount to the player's success. If Ellie ever dies, the player will game over, no matter how healthy Joel is. But taking a look at this other illustration, the one that represents the broader goal of the player's actions, the very last section stands out. If you're familiar with The Last of Us's story, you'll know what I'm talking about, but there's a big shift in Joel's broader intention during the game's final chapter. Eventually, Joel and Ellie do meet up with the Fireflies, meaning Ellie's immunity will be used to craft a vaccine for the cordyceps infection. However, there's a catch. They're gonna have to cut out Ellie's brain. I think she needs that, guys. Joel cannot let Ellie die. Over their travels, she's pretty much become his daughter, and he can't go 0 for 2. So, defying the mission he and Ellie have been fighting for the entire game, Joel single-handedly kills dozens of Fireflies and at least one surgeon to save Ellie's life one last time. Whether or not you agree with Joel's decision here, the synergy between the player's actions in the game leading up to the final chapter and Joel's goals when it comes to what he prioritizes the most make this climax absolutely electrifying. It's so intense and claustrophobic as well, especially because for once the player has to go on the offensive. But even amid this morally gray crusade, it can feel pretty natural. After all, you're just doing what you've been doing for the entire game. Fighting for Ellie. Please keep these intention maps in mind when we begin discussing The Last of Us 2.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to play anymore.
I find it very difficult to critique the sequel because there's a subset of The Last of Us 2 haters who would never enjoy a game with any overt LGBTQ representation, or a game that makes you play as a woman instead of a man, or kills your favorite Scrumblow, but today we shall try. Neil Druckmann has infamously stated that while The Last of Us is a game about love, The Last of Us 2 is a game about hate. As in, people love the first one and hate the second one! In all seriousness, let's summarize the sequel's plot. It's been years since Joel and Ellie first met, and while they'd like to say they've moved on, the past does not want to forget too soon. Remember that surgeon that Joel heroically murdered at the end of The Last of Us? Well, he had a daughter, and she's just a little bit mad that not only is her dad dead, but the whole of humanity might as well have been doomed by Joel. She's so mad that she and a group of friends hunt down Joel and take him to the lynx. They kill him, he's dead now. So, as it happens, instead of Joel, you play as Ellie in The Last of Us 2, whose purpose has become to avenge Joel and kill Abby. Now, here's where the first instance of dissonance between The Last of Us and its sequel becomes evident. Remember how I said that in The Last of Us, most of Joel and Ellie's battles are 100% justified? It's kind of the opposite when it comes to Ellie's revenge adventure. Reventure? I can dig that. The core justification for pretty much everything that Ellie does in the game isn't in that same justifiable avenue. It's purely eye for an eye. Ironically, pretty much the same thing Abby was doing. You might agree with Ellie, but you might not. And if you don't, you're probably not going to enjoy killing people for her quest. When it comes to the player's actual interaction with The Last of Us 2, its gameplay feel, if you will, it's pretty much the same as The Last of Us 1, but drastically improved in my opinion. It's smoother, combat is more involved, a lot of arenas are just way more fun to explore, so why does it kind of feel like I'm playing a different game? Remember how in The Last of Us 1, it's only in the final chapter that Joel is really going on the offensive? He's brutal, merciless even. Ellie is kind of like that for the entirety of The Last of Us 2. Let's look at a specific example of what I'm talking about. Most of the human enemies you fight as Joel in The Last of Us 1 are pretty evil and simple with how they're characterized. They're brutes, raiders, ruffians, you know the type. Disposable bad guy fodder. In the final chapter though, the Fireflies exhibit far more intelligence than the usual AI enemy.
Smugglers in!
They're shown to strategize with one another quite efficiently, and they'll desperately try to reason with Joel in their final moments.
Take that position. No matter what, it doesn't get through here.
Don't scare me.
Stop this!
As it turns out, in The Last of Us 2, many of the human enemies Ellie battles with exhibit a similar intelligence. They're organized, patient, and once their backs are up against the wall, they're desperate, openly begging for their lives in some cases.
Hey, got anything? You all right over there?
Mila? The hell are you doing?
You're done!
Just let me go! Got her! Right over here!
Let her
go, or you're dead!
Motherfucker! God, Jim.
Miles! Just fuck it! Got her! Fuck!
I don't know about anybody else, but it kind of made me queasy the first time I played. I honestly think this is kind of brilliantly done, showing how Ellie has truly adopted the worst of Joel's mannerisms through their gameplay similarity. But when it comes to the player's experience, they might be thinking, isn't this kind of exhausting? Is this reventure worth it? I really don't know if I want to do this anymore. But you can't stop now. Then it all would have been for nothing. If you don't finish this, then what was it all for? All thoughts that I'm sure occurred to Ellie more than once. I'm gonna be honest though, this magnificent overlap between the characters and the player's emotional fatigue is so well done, I'm almost sure it's accidental. Especially considering how the TV show has kind of backpedaled on how violent or bloodthirsty Ellie comes across as. I hope the next season has a bit more spine in it. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, huh? But I hope I've convinced you a little bit as to why I like The Last of Us 2 so much. I find it very fascinating to say the least. But let's move on from that example of ludonarrative harmony to one a bit simpler and lighthearted.
Objection!
Nothing's happened yet.
Sorry, I got excited.
The Ace Attorney series is a very interesting visual novel-based franchise, because in a genre that is almost defined by its linearity, many visual novels don't have any interactivity other than clicking through text, Ace Attorney never really feels bland or boring, in my opinion of course. This is due in part to the series' unique mystery-solving adventure mechanics, of which Will summarizes the game's concept to explain. Put simply, the world of Ace Attorney is one where the idea of justice is completely corrupted. Innocent people are often convicted of terrible crimes in rushed trials with little to no satisfying evidence. What is this? America? The player controls a lawyer, fighting against injustice in an unfair system. We'll be focusing on Phoenix Wright, who's the protagonist of most of the games. In a typical chapter of any of the Ace Attorney games, Phoenix is presented with a sympathetic character who is being screwed over by the justice system, almost always in a murder case as it happens. The core gameplay loop of most Ace Attorney games consists of two parts, investigations and trials. In investigations, you travel to important locations, search for clues and evidence, and talk to witnesses or other important people. Then, in trials, you have to use the evidence you've collected to disprove witness testimony or present new suppositions on what really happened. It sounds a bit more involved than your average visual novel, right? Well, the way the genres interact is a bit clunky, to be honest. Moving between areas and talking to different people during investigations can be engaging, but a lot of the time new characters will appear arbitrarily, or new evidence will all of a sudden be collectible when it wasn't the day before. When it comes to trials, finding the contradictions can be super satisfying, but many times it can feel like a trial and error busy work to progress the game. Witness testimonies will consist of around half a dozen statements regarding the case, and 2 or 3 statements might be suspect. With regards to those statements, there might be 2 or 3 pieces of evidence that are related, and in almost all instances there's only one correct answer to progress the trial. But if you're not incredibly on the ball with what the game wants of you, there could be multiple different solutions you need to try before getting the right one. And the game has a health system, and it's not very generous when it comes to respawn points. See what I mean when I said these games can feel clunky? So why is it still so engaging to play? The answer for me at least is the characters. It goes without saying that a good visual novel will have some great characters. After all, they pretty much define the games they appear in. I consider a well-written character to be one that is interesting to spend time with, has discernible and understandable motivations, or maybe they're just plain funny. Sometimes a character will fulfill a certain type of role before stepping into another one altogether, or else a character will present themselves as a certain archetype, but exhibit unexpected depth. Ace Attorney has it all, but one of the characters that I find the most interesting, and the one that I want to talk about for the purposes of this video, is the player character, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney himself. It's a bit of a staple in the visual novel genre that the player character isn't much of a character at all. In popular subgenres like dating sims, the absence of characterization for the player's insert serves to make it easier for the player to get into the story, or imagine themselves in the character's place.
Why you'd want to be in a situation like this is beyond me.
It's notable then that Phoenix Wright's character is as pronounced as it is in the series. He's brazen, ambitious, a little bit too cocky, and a lot of it over his head. The character kind of gets flanderized into a total bluffer eventually, so much so that he eventually becomes a pro poker player of all things. But when it came to the first game especially, it felt like a very natural character trait. Often, Phoenix, by proxy of the player, will present the correct piece of evidence to progress the game, but the character himself will have no idea what the contradiction means. He'll be like,
I might have put the cart before the horse here.
And then the game will present a much smaller selection of possible explanations for the contradiction. A lot of the times these selections will be totally obvious as to which is the correct answer. The judge will be like, "But how can you explain this contradiction? Why would the witness lie?" And the responses will be stuff like, "The witness is the killer," "The witness is the victim," and "The witness is my grandma," or something stupid. My theory, my game theory, if you will, is that this is done to account for the gameplay structure's occasional trial and error loop, so that a player who can't figure out the mystery can still blunder their way through the mystery's logical choke points while still feeling like they're interacting with and deducing elements of the mystery itself. These moments are all highlighted strongly alongside Phoenix's characterization. Like I said, he'll often panic after finding a contradiction, since he doesn't know what it means yet. But isn't this kind of a hilarious double-edged sword? Think about it. If you're keeping up with the mystery, as in you've already figured out how much of the murder was carried out and how the clues will be used to prove certain points, then it can be pretty frustrating to constantly hear Phoenix panic about the meanings behind contradictions. Like, calm down, dude, I've got this. Phoenix, calm down! But if you struggle a bit with actually finding the right piece of evidence and the right statement, or if you can't predict how the murder actually happened, then it's likely that you're in a very similar headspace to Phoenix. The overzealous nature of the objections is one of the series' constants, and this ludonarrative 50-50 appears in most of the games. It's hard to tell if this was done intentionally, but it's an interesting way to deal with the series' occasionally frustrating trial and error gameplay loop, right? I actually didn't realize, until actually reading the script, that I was using the phrase trial and error so much, and I wasn't even doing it intentionally. Like, as a pun. I'm literally so embarrassed.
Alright, fine, but I'm taking that apple. Thief! Thief! I'll literally kill you for this!
The genre of RPG is quite broad, no? It stands for role-playing game, after all, which can encompass pretty much every game we've covered today, if you think about it. But of course, I want to talk about some turn-based RPGs, the kind where the player explores an overworld, occasionally diving into dynamic turn-based battles, usually in some kind of fantastical setting. It's a great way to create a lot out of a little. An RPG's graphics might be simple, its world might even be shallow, but the gameplay loop of exploration, narration, and battle-ation is still engaging, with the right balance. But with a genre so fantastic...
Say that again?
How can a player connect with the characters they control? Obviously, a player is not going to be able to relate to battling monsters or casting spells, but when an RPG's gameplay is crafted in a very specific manner, a player might just find themselves connecting to the game in a much more literal sense than they expected. Such is the case for In Stars and Time. This is an instance of a piece of art that I don't want to get too far into before vehemently suggesting you check it out. If you're a fan of RPGs, especially subversive ones that make use of typical genre tropes, you're gonna love this one. I consider this game to be just as good as popular RPGs like Undertale or Omori, if not for the exact same reasons, but it kind of seems like it's become a cult classic instead of a widespread sensation, and I think that's just a bit of a shame. Anyway, we'll be discussing the plot a good bit, so last chance to play it spoiler-free. In Stars in Time, you play as Siffrin, one of many adventurers tasked with defeating the King. The King has been doing some real rotten stuff, and across the journey, the team has collected all the thingies so they can stop him. Okay, if you've heard of a video game, you know what the plot is. In Stars in Time drops you in right at the start of the party's penultimate day. Everybody's already level 45. You already have a solid relationship with all the party members, and all that's left is to actually fight the King. And you got crushed by a rock and died.
Embarrassing!
Thankfully, Siffrin gets another chance, waking up exactly where they did at the start of the game. And if you didn't figure it out already, we're in a time loop. It's looping time! I'm gonna loop it! Okay, in all honesty, I'm not a huge time loop connoisseur. The only big ones I've experienced are In Stars in Time, Groundhog Day, of course, and, anybody remember Happy Death Day?
Eat it, bitch!
Oh, you do? Yeah, me too, it's alright. Anytime Siffrin dies, they get sent back to this exact point, and with how many tricks and traps are inside the final dungeon, known as the House, by the way, they may be here for a while. There's a character whose purpose is to sort of guide Siffrin and the player to a solution, but a lot of progression comes down to trial and error exploration. You need to explore everywhere if you want to get the knowledge you need to succeed. But something interesting happens the more loops Siffrin experiences. Their inner monologue loses a lot of its energy. Their body language changes. But why wouldn't they be tired? Wouldn't you be if you were experiencing the same thing over and over again? Oh yeah, we're playing a time loop game. In the most literal example of ludonarrative harmony we're talking about today, Siffrin and the player are experiencing the exact same thing. The excitement any amount of progress provides, the fatigue and frustration that comes when you run into an obstacle, it's like Siffrin and the player are one and the same. But not really. Siffrin is a fleshed out character in his own right, with a whole backstory and everything you get to learn about in the game. But in my opinion, that makes the connection the player forms with him so much cooler. What other medium than video games could provide this kind of connection between a character and a person? It's a pretty simple kind of harmony, unlike the Last of Us one we discussed earlier, but I think that's alright. Especially because I actively do not want to talk too much about In Stars in Time, so I don't spoil everything. Please check it out. It has amazing writing, great artwork, and music. The gameplay is...
A few minutes later.
Fine. Anyway, let's talk about the GOAT Deltarune! Deltarune is an ongoing RPG created and directed by Toby Fox. You might have heard of him. He created the Earthbound Halloween hack. I consider Deltarune to be one of the best RPGs I've ever played purely on the basis of how astronomically entertaining it is in every moment. In a stark contrast to In Stars in Time, where the repetitive nature of the game was kind of baked into the concept itself, it feels like Deltarune bends over backwards to break its own barriers, try something new, or different, or crazy in every conceivable instance. You might play Punch-Out with two enormous mechas, or battle the annoying side character in a puzzle-off in a tunnel of love, or do a wacky game show where you play a game in a game. In a game? But why are we talking about Deltarune in a conversation about ludonarrative harmony? It doesn't sound like any of those things are even remotely close to relatable. Well, Deltarune does and is doing something very interesting with its story, and that's closely exploring the idea of connection and control. Deltarune has been released by chapter so far, and chapter 1 of Deltarune is by far the most normal of the bunch, in the sense that pretty early on you can get a rough idea of everything that's going to happen. It's predictable in a way that a ton of RPGs are. Go to the castle, fight the king, you know? But at the very end of this chapter, something unexpected and kind of disturbing happens. Chris, the character we've been in control of this whole time, struggles out of bed, stalks to the center of their bedroom, and tears their own heart out of their chest. If the player moves around while Chris aura farms, they're still in charge of the heart, the soul, that they've controlled in battles and menus. But now they're trapped in a cage, forced to watch Chris brandish a knife with a sinister grin. Now imagine waiting 3 years before you got to know what happens immediately after that. So as it turns out, the player doesn't control Chris. The player controls this soul, which is almost like a parasite in Chris's body, controlling their movements and their speech. It's not a super pervasive element of Deltarune for the most part, but Chris does take back control of themselves in a couple of key moments in the story, and this theme of the player forcefully taking control is present in a few other aspects of the game, particularly the Weird Route, aka Snowgrave. Basically, in Chapter 2, the player will spend a lot of time separated from their core party, instead hanging out with Noelle, Chris's classmate and childhood friend. Noelle is pretty reserved in battles, but with enough conditioning and encouragement, the player transforms her into something of a personal weapon, commanding her to freeze any enemies that get in their way. She completely loses her sense of self, even not recognizing another classmate right away as she blindly does who she thinks is Chris says. Snowgrave is not as simple as Undertale's genocide route either, where you could probably do it blind. You really have to go out of your way to torture this poor girl with your influence. And for what? It's not like in Undertale where the genocide route is a pseudo-hard mode, and you get a couple of unique bosses. In the Snowgrave route, you capture an innocent person in your crushing influence for nothing more than the love of the game. Because, if you think about it, complete control is kind of terrifying, right? Have you ever thought about what it truly means to control a character? Deltarune and its Snowgrave route are fascinating both in their own right as a unique RPG, but also as think pieces on the genre as a whole. The game is really focusing on the somewhat grim reality of what someone playing an RPG is literally doing. I'm super excited to see how the story ends in 2035. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope I've given you something interesting to consider when you're playing a game, or observing a painting, or even watching an online video? That's right. Much like the player and the characters create a connection during an instance of ludonarrative harmony, you and I have created a connection during the time spent watching this video. The assimilation has begun. To complete the transfer, please like, comment, and subscribe. Join the collective, and see you again soon!
My name is Solomon Levi at my store on Salem Street. That's where you'll buy your coats and vests and everything else that's neat. Second-handed ulsterettes and everything else that's fine. For all the boys they trade with me at $149.